We are live, broadcasting from my parents' house in St. George, Utah. I am your apparently newly divorced first herald of the Church of Korihor, the godless preacher Joe Rollins, also known as Exmo Joe, one of my many aliases they call me Tater Salad. Hopefully you guys can hear me well enough. I don't have, obviously, my big studio setup that I had back at the old house, but I am grateful to be with you here today. I do want to let you guys in on once again, on the big announcement. 1 week from today, we will be canonizing officially at our canonization event. Our Godless sermon will be the canonization of the Korihor canon, writings for spiritual growth for godless people. And now let us hymnalize with a godless hymn, after which I am going to actually be reading you a godless sermon. That is not so much the way we normally do things, but over the course of the last year, I have been collecting slowly and curating a list of writings and important documents from history, from the history of the movement for godless people, atheism and agnosticism. There was a great man named Robert G. Ingersoll, and I want to tell you about him and read you. Thanks, Lisa. It was a good show on the Latter Daily Digest. I thought we had a good time. Bug Brockway, I've talked to her a few times, but on Facebook. But it was good to put a voice with a name. We had a good time. And then, of course, it's always great to see Gene and Tim and to talk with them. Let us begin with one of our favorite hymns, one of my favorite godless hymns from our collection celebrating people who have stood up against fascism. And that is a song called One Chance, in which we celebrate the great Jesse Owens, after which we shall deliver a sermon that is over 100 years old, the Thanksgiving sermon of Robert G. Ingersoll.
This is my one chance to prove Hitler wrong. Jesse Owens, one chance. I knew all along. This one chance to make them see. I have one chance to prove it to me. Raised in Ohio, the Klan couldn't break me. The Buckeye bullets, golden opportunity. Now I'll reach for that gold, take my race to Berlin, rock this old world with the heart to win. It's my one chance to prove Hitler wrong. Jesse Owens, one chance. I knew all along, this one chance to make them see. I have one chance to prove it to me. Swift up, swift down, this bullet will fly. The world will see Jesse's reason why we live and we die. My only race to win is Jesse Owens' heat. This is the bullet's race within. This is my one chance to prove Hitler wrong. Jesse Owens, one chance. I knew all along, this one chance to make them see. I have one chance to prove it to me. 4 golds later, he made it clear how he felt. Didn't shake my hand, nor would Roosevelt. Now I am gone, brothers all, our race goes on. this is your one chance to prove Hitler wrong. This is our chance. This is our song. Take your one chance to make them see. Take this one chance and race with me.
Cool. I want to tell you a little bit about a great man by the name of Robert Green Ingersoll before we begin to sermonize with one of his most famous and most loved sermons of all time. We're broadcasting now in both portrait and landscape. I'm not sure why that makes a difference. I've made my whole career video production, and I don't understand YouTube entirely yet. I don't know that anybody does, but in any event, we can now do that, so we're doing it. I don't know. All right. How many of you are watching in landscape? And how many of you are watching in portrait? I'd love to know. Robert G. Ingersoll was born when Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, was just a boy. I don't know how closely connected it was, but they were both in New York. And but he spent most of his life in Illinois, which Joseph Smith was there at the end of his life, but Robert G. Ingersoll was significantly younger. I mention that because it gives a frame of reference slightly for what I'm going to tell you. His father was the Reverend John Ingersoll, and he was a Presbyterian minister who was adamantly anti-slavery. And his mother was an activist in a day when women couldn't vote, women couldn't have a bank account, women couldn't own property, women couldn't start a business. His mother was a political activist who circulated to Congress people tracts explaining why slavery was wrong. And sometimes easy to forget that this was a country where that was at one point a pretty serious debate that had to be proven to people that slavery was wrong. She died when Robert was very, very young, and his father remarried. Not long after that, when they moved to Illinois, and he took up a new position preaching in Illinois, he was tried for non-ministerial conduct on account of the fact, John Ingersoll, that his sermons were too liberal. Liberal by their understanding in the day. And he was basically defrocked of his authority to preach. And John Ingersoll was out of work for a while there, had to move frequently, taking whatever jobs he could. Later, the Congregationalist Church actually restored to him his authority to preach at the pulpit, but his sons never forgot. He had two sons. The older boy, or I think older son, was a man named Ebon. Believe it or not, not Elon, but Ebon. His sons, who were not able to get a formal education because on account of the poverty that they grew up in, nonetheless, both of them aspired to become professionals. Robert Ingersoll became a teacher and eventually put himself through past the bar in the state of Illinois and became one of the most well-renowned trial attorneys in the country. And he also, at that time, when the Civil War broke out, he volunteered for the Union, and he went out and raised an entire regiment of cavalry for the Union Army, specifically to go and fight, literally fight, against slavery, because he was such a staunch abolitionist. He became one of the most well-renowned speakers in America in the 19th century, really one of the most well-renowned speakers, you could say, in the world, in the Star Lecture Circuit, which is to say he was paid months and months in advance to get tickets to hear this man give a speech, and where he went. And one of these speeches um, is known as the Thanksgiving speech, or the Thanksgiving sermon, excuse me. Most all of his speeches were either about women's rights, about um, opposition to slavery, about housing and why it was important that that unhousing should be eliminated, and that homes were, in a nation where there was plenty enough resources for every person to have a home, it was immoral to think that some would be considered too poor to be housed. And he, more than anything else, he was known as the Great Agnostic, because his message was that while he did not see a difference between agnosticism and atheism, he did not believe it was possible to know that there was no God, but as far as he knew, no gods that were taught by churches were any god worthy of worship. And he became known as the Great Agnostic. His writings make up a large portion so far of what I have collected into what will be launched next Sunday as the Korihor Canon. And this speech, as I was reviewing it, really struck me. And so I wanted to deliver for you this reading of the Thanksgiving sermon because it so moved me. I will warn you, this is a 19th century sermon. It has 19th century language. If you look up the meanings of words, you will find them. I want to acknowledge, though, that many of them in a modern age have very different context. It's included as it was written by Robert G. Ingersoll, and I didn't change anything. I might have changed some punctuation and so forth in the actual document, but this is the Thanksgiving sermon. Many ages ago, our fathers were living in dens and caves. Their bodies, their low foreheads, were covered with hair. They were eating berries, roots, bark, and vermin. They were fond of snakes and raw fish. They discovered fire and, probably by accident, learned how to use it by friction. They found how to warm themselves, to fight the frost and storm. They fashioned clubs and rude weapons of stone, with which they killed the larger beasts and now and then each other. Slowly, painfully, almost imperceptibly, they advanced. They crawled and stumbled, staggered and struggled toward the light. To them, the world was unknown. On every hand was the mysterious, the sinister, the hurtful. The forests were filled with monsters, and the darkness was crowded with ghosts, devils, and fiendish gods. These poor wretches were the slaves of fear, the sport of dreams. Now and then, one rose a little above his fellows, used his senses, the little reason that he had, found something new, some better way. Then the people killed him and afterward knelt with reverence at his grave. Then another thinker gave his thought, was murdered, another tomb became sacred, another step was taken in advance. And so through countless years of ignorance and cruelty, of thought and crime, of murder and worship, of heroism, suffering, and self-denial, the race has reached the heights where now we stand. Looking back over the long and devious roads that lie between the barbarism of the past and the civilization of today, thinking of the centuries that rolled like waves between these distant shores, we can form some idea of what our fathers suffered, of the mistakes they made, some idea of their ignorance, their stupidity, and some idea of their sense, their goodness, their heroism. It is a long road from the savage to the scientist, from a den to a mansion, from leaves to clothes, from a flickering rush to the arc light, from a hammer of stone to the modern mill, a long distance from the pipe of Pan to the violin, to the orchestra, from a floating log to the steamship, from a sickle to a reaper, from a flail to a threshing machine, from a crooked stick to a plow, from a spinning wheel to a spinning jenny, from a hand loom to a jacquard that weaves fair forms and wondrous flowers beyond Arachne's utmost dream, from a few hieroglyphics on the skins of beasts, on bricks of clay, to a printing press, to a library, a long distance from the messenger traveling on foot to the electric spark, from knives and tools of stone to those of steel, a long distance from sand to telescopes, from echo to the phonograph that buries in indented lines and dots the sounds of living speech and then gives back to life the very words and voices of the dead. A long way from the trumpet to the telephone that transports speech as swift as thought and drops the words perfect as minted coins in listening ears. A long way from a fallen tree to the suspension bridge, from the dried sinews of beasts to the cables of steel, from the oar to the propeller, from the sling to the rifle, from the catapult to the cannon, a long distance, from revenge to law, from the club to the legislature, from slavery to freedom, from appearance to fact, from fear to reason. And yet the distance has been traveled by the human race. Countless obstructions have been overcome. Numberless enemies have been conquered. Thousands and thousands of victories have been won for the right, and millions have lived, labored, and died for their fellow men. For the blessings we enjoy, for the happiness that is ours, we ought to be grateful. Our hearts should blossom with thankfulness. Whom, what should we thank? Let us be honest, generous. Should we thank the church? Christianity has controlled Christendom for at least 1,500 years. During these centuries, what have the Orthodox churches accomplished for the good of man? In this life, man needs raiment and roof, food and fuel. We must be protected from heat and cold, from snow and storm. He must take thought for the morrow. In the summer of youth, he must prepare for the winter of age. He must know something of the cause of disease, of the conditions of health. If possible, he must conquer pain, increase happiness, and lengthen life. He must supply the wants of the body and feed the hunger of the mind. What good has the church done? Has it taught men to cultivate the earth, to build homes, to weave cloth, to cure or prevent disease, to build ships, to navigate the seas, to conquer pain, or to lengthen life? Did Christ or any of his apostles add to the sum of useful knowledge? Did they say one word in favor of any science, of any art? Did they teach their fellow men to make a living, how to overcome the obstructions of nature, how to prevent sickness, how to protect themselves from pain, from famine, from misery and rags? Did they explain any of the phenomena of nature, any of the facts that affect the life of man? Did they say anything in favor of investigation, of study, of thought? Did they teach the gospel of self-reliance, of industry, of honest effort? Can any farmer, mechanic, or scientist find in the New Testament one useful fact? Is there anything in the sacred book that can help the geologist, the astronomer, the biologist, the physician, the inventor, the manufacturer of any useful thing? What has the church done? From the very first, it taught the vanity, the worthlessness of all earthly things. It taught the wickedness of wealth, the blessedness of poverty. It taught that the business of this life was to prepare for death. It insisted that a certain belief was necessary to ensure salvation, and that all who failed to believe or doubted in the least would suffer eternal pain. According to the church, the natural desires, ambitions, and passions of man are all wicked and depraved. To love God, to practice self denial, to overcome desire, to despise wealth, to hate prosperity, to desert wife and children, to live on roots and berries, to repeat prayers, to wear rags, to live in filth, and drive love from the heart, these, for centuries, were the highest and most perfect virtues, and those who practiced them were saints. The saints did not assist their fellow men assisted them. They did not labor for others. They were beggars, parasites, vermin. They were insane. They followed the teachings of Christ. They took no thought for the morrow. They mutilated their bodies, scarred their flesh, and destroyed their minds for the sake of happiness in another world. During the journey of life, they kept their eyes on the grave. They gathered no flowers by the way. They walked in the dust of the road, avoided the green fields. Their moans made all the music they wished to hear. The babble of brooks, the songs of birds, the laughter of children were nothing to them. Pleasure was the child of sin, and the happy needed a change of heart. They were sinless and miserable, but they had faith. They were pious and wretched, but they were limping towards heaven. What has the church done? It has denounced pride and luxury, all things that adorn and enrich life, all the pleasures of sense, the ecstasies of love, the happiness of the hearth, the clasp and kiss of wife and child. And the church has done this because it regarded this life as a period of probation, a time to prepare, to become spiritual, to overcome the natural, to fix the affections on the invisible, to become passionless, to subdue the flesh, to congeal the blood, to fold the wings of fancy, to become dead to the world, so that when you appeared before God, you would be the exact opposite of what he made you. What has the church done? It pretended to have a revelation from God. It knew the road to eternal joy, the way to death. It preached salvation by faith and declared that only Orthodox believers could become angels and all doubters would be damned. It knew this, and so knowing, it became the enemy of discussion, of investigation, of thought. Why investigate? Why discuss? Why think when you know? It sought to enslave the world. It appealed to force. It unsheathed the sword, lighted the faggot, forged the chain, built the dungeon, erected the scaffold, invented and used the instruments of torture. It branded, maimed, and mutilated. It imprisoned and tortured. It blinded and burned, hanged and crucified, and utterly destroyed millions and millions of human beings. It touched every nerve of the body, produced every pain that can be felt, every agony that can be endured. And it did all of this to preserve what it called the truth, to destroy heresy and doubt, and to save, if possible, the souls of a few. It was honest. It was necessary to prevent the development of the brain, to arrest all progress, and to do this, the church used all its power. If men were allowed to think and express their thoughts, they would fill their minds and the minds of others with doubts. If they were allowed to think, they would investigate, and then they might contradict the creed, dispute the words of priests and defy the church. The priests cried to the people, "It is for us to talk, it is for you to hear. Our duty is to preach, and yours is to believe." What has the church done? There have been thousands of councils and synods, thousands and thousands of occasions when the clergy have met and discussed and quarreled, when pope and cardinals, bishops and priests have added to or explained their creeds and denied the rights of others. What useful truth did they discover? What fact did they find? Did they add to the intellectual wealth of the world? Did they increase the sum of knowledge? I admit that they looked over a number of Jewish books and picked out the ones that Jehovah wrote. Did they find the medicinal virtue that dwells in any weed or flower? I know that they decided that the Holy Ghost was not created, not begotten, but that he proceeded. Did they teach us the mysteries of the metals or how to purify the ores in furnace flames? They shouted, "Great is the mystery of godliness." Did they show us how to improve our condition in this world? They informed us that Christ had two natures and two wills. Did they give us even a hint as to any useful thing? They gave us predestination, foreordination, and just enough free will to go to hell. Did they discover or show us how to produce anything for food? Did they produce anything to satisfy the hunger of man? Instead of this, they discovered that a peasant girl who lived in Palestine was the mother of God. This they proved by a book, and to make the book evidence, they called it inspired. Did they tell us anything about chemistry, how to combine and separate substances, how to subtract the hurtful, how to produce the useful? They told us that bread, by making certain motions and mumbling certain prayers, could be changed into the flesh of God, and that in the same way wine could be changed to his blood. And this notwithstanding the fact that God never had any flesh or blood, but has always been a spirit without body, parts, or passions. What has the church done? It gave us the history of the world, of the stars, and the beginning of all things. It taught the geology of Moses, the astronomy of Joshua and Elijah. It taught the fall of man and the atonement, proved that a Jewish peasant was God, established the existence of hell, purgatory, and heaven. It pretended to have a revelation from God, the scriptures, in which could be found all knowledge, everything that man could need in the journey of life. Nothing outside of the inspired book, except legends and prayers, could be of any value. Books that contradicted the Bible were hurtful. Those that agreed with it, useless. Nothing was of importance except faith, credulity, belief. The church said, "Let philosophy alone. Count your beads. Ask no questions. Fall upon your knees. Shut your eyes and save your souls." What has the church done? For centuries, it kept the earth flat. For centuries, it made all the hosts of heaven travel around this world. For centuries, it clung to sacred knowledge and fought facts with the ferocity of a fiend. For centuries, it hated the useful. It was the deadly enemy of medicine. Disease was produced by devils and could be cured only by priests, decaying bones and holy water. Doctors were the rivals of priests. They diverted the revenues. The church opposed the study of anatomy, was against the dissection of the dead. Man had no right to cure disease. God would do that through his priests. Man had no right to prevent disease. Diseases were sent by God as judgments. The church opposed inoculation, vaccination, and the use of chloroform and ether. It was declared to be a sin, a crime for a woman to lessen the pangs of motherhood. the church declared that woman must bear the curse of the merciful Jehovah. What has the church done? It taught that the insane were inhabited by devils. Insanity was not a disease. It was produced by demons. It could be cured by prayers, gifts, amulets, and charms. All these had to be paid for. This enriched the church. These ideas were honestly entertained by Protestants as well as Catholics, by Luther, Calvin, Knox, and Wesley. What has the church done? It taught the awful doctrine of witchcraft. It filled the darkness with demons, the air with devils, and the world with grief and shame. It charged men, women, and children with being in league with Satan to injure their fellows. Old women were convicted for causing storms at sea, for preventing rain, and for bringing frost. Girls were convicted for having changed themselves into wolves, snakes, and toads. These witches were burned for causing diseases, for selling their souls, and for souring beer. These witches were burned for causing diseases, for selling their souls, and I just read that. All these things were done with the aid of the devil, who sought to persecute the faithful, the lambs of God. Satan sought in many ways to scandalize the church. He sometimes assumed the appearance of a priest and committed crimes. On one occasion, he personated a bishop renowned for his sanctity, allowed himself to be discovered and dragged from the room of a beautiful widow. So perfectly did he counterfeit the features and form of the bishop that many who were well acquainted with the prelate were actually deceived, and the widow herself thought her lover was the bishop. All this was done by the devil to bring reproach upon holy men. Hundreds of like instances could be given, as the war waged between demons and priests was long and bitter. These popes and priests, these clergymen, were not hypocrites. They believed in the New Testament, in the teachings of Christ, and they knew that the principal business of the Savior was casting out devils. What has the church done? It made the wife a slave, the property of the husband, and it placed the husband as much above the wife as Christ was above the husband. It taught that a nun is purer, nobler than a mother. It induced millions of pure and conscientious girls to renounce the joys of life, to take the veil woven of night and death, to wear the habiliments of the dead, made them believe that they were the brides of Christ. For my part, I would as soon be a widow as the bride of a man who had been dead for 1,800 years. The poor deluded girls imagined that they, in some mysterious way, were in spiritual wedlock, united with God. All worldly desires were driven from their hearts. They filled their lives with fastings, with prayers, with self-accusings. They forgot fathers and mothers and gave their love to the invisible. They were the victims, the convicts of superstition, prisoners in the penitentiaries of God. Conscientious, good, sincere, insane. These loving women gave their hearts to a phantom, their lives to a dream. A few years ago at a revival, a fine, buxom girl was converted, born again. In her excitement, she cried, "I'm married to Christ! I'm married to Christ!" And in her delirium, she threw her arms around the neck of an old man and cried again, "I'm married to Christ." The old man, who happened to be a kind of skeptic, gently removed her hands, saying at the same time, "I don't know much about your husband, but I have great respect for your father-in-law." Priests, theologians have taken advantage of women, of their gentleness, their love of approbation. They have lived upon their hopes and fears. Like vampires, they have sucked their blood. They have made them responsible for the sins of the world. They have taught them the slave virtues, meekness, humility, implicit obedience. They have fed their minds with mistakes, mysteries, and absurdities. They have endeavored to weaken and shrivel their brains until to them there would be no possible connection between evidence and belief, between fact and faith. What has the church done? It was the enemy of commerce, of business. It denounced the taking of interest for money. Without taking interest for money, progress is impossible. The steamships, the great factories, the railroads have all been built with borrowed money, money on which interest was promised and for the most part paid. The church the church was opposed to fire insurance, to life insurance. It denounced insurance in any form as gambling, as immoral. To insure your life was to declare that you had no confidence in God, that you relied on a corporation instead of divine providence. It was declared that God would provide for your widow and your fatherless children. To insure your life was to insult heaven. What has the church done? The church regarded epidemics as the messengers of the good God. The Black Death was sent by the Eternal Father, whose mercy spared some and whose justice murdered the rest. To stop the scourge, they tried to soften the heart of God by kneelings and prostrations, by processions and prayers, by burning incense, and by making vows. They did not try to remove the cause. The cause was God. They did not ask for pure water, but for holy water. Faith and filth lived, or rather died, together. Religion and rags, piety and pollution kept company. Sanctity kept its odor. What has the church done? It was the enemy of art and literature. It destroyed the marbles of Greece and Rome. Beauty was pagan. It destroyed so far as it could the best literature of the world. It feared thought, but it preserved the scriptures, the ravings of insane saints, the falsehoods of the fathers, the bulls of popes, the accounts of miracles performed by shrines, by dried blood and faded hair, by pieces of bones and wood, by rusty nails and thorns, by handkerchiefs and rags, by water and beads, and by a finger of the Holy Ghost. This was the literature of the church. I admit that the priests were honest as ignorant. More could not be said. What has the church done? Christianity claims with great pride that it established asylums for the insane. Yes, it did. But the insane were treated as criminals. They were regarded as the homes, as the tenement houses of the devils. They were persecuted and tormented. They were chained and flogged and starved and killed. The asylums were prisons, dungeons. The insane were victims, and the keepers were ignorant, conscientious, pious fiends. They were not trying to help men. They were fighting devils, destroying demons. They were not actuated by love, but by hate and fear. What has the church done? It founded schools where facts were denied, where science was denounced, and philosophy despised. Schools where priests were made, where they were taught to hate reason and to look upon doubts as the suggestions of the devil. Schools where the heart was hardened and the brain shriveled. Schools in which lies were sacred and truths profane. Schools for the more general diffusion of ignorance. Schools to prevent thought, to suppress knowledge. Schools where the purpose of enslaving the world. Schools for the purpose of enslaving the world. Schools in which teachers knew less than pupils. What has the church done? It has used its influence with God to get rain and sunshine, to stop flood and storm, to kill insects, rats, snakes, and wild beasts, to stay pestilence and famine, to delay frost and snow, to lengthen the lives of kings and queens, to protect presidents, to give legislators wisdom, to increase collections and subscriptions. In marriages, it has made God the party of the third part. It has sprinkled water on babes when they were named. It has put oil on the dying and repeated prayers for the dead. It has tried to protect the people from the malice of the devil, from ghosts and spooks, from witches and wizards, and all the leering fiends that seek to poison the souls of men. It has endeavored to protect the sheep of God from the wolves of science, from the wild beasts of doubt and investigation. It has tried to wean the lambs of the Lord from the delights, the pleasures, the joys of life. According to the philosophy of the church, the virtuous weep and suffer, the vicious laugh and thrive. The good carry a cross and the wicked fly. But in the next life, this will be reversed. Then the good will be happy and the bad will be damned. The church filled the world with faith and crime. It polluted the fountains of joy. It gave us an ignorant, jealous, revengeful, and cruel God, sometimes merciful, sometimes ferocious, now infamous, sometimes wise, generally foolish. It gave us a devil, cunning, malicious, almost the equal of God, not quite as strong, but quicker, not as profound, but sharper. It gave us angels with wings, cherubim and seraphim, and a heaven with harps and hallelujahs, with streets of gold and gates of pearl. It gave us fiends and imps with wings like bats. It gave us ghosts and goblins, spooks and sprites, and little devils that swarmed in the bodies of men. And it gave us hell, where the souls of men will roast in eternal flames. Shall we thank the church? Shall we thank the Orthodox churches? Shall we thank them for the hell they made here? Shall we thank them for the hell of the future? We must remember that the church was founded and has been protected by God, that all the popes and cardinals, all the bishops, priests, and monks, all the ministers and exhorters were selected and set apart, all sanctified and enlightened by the infinite God, that the Holy Scriptures were inspired by the same being, and that all Orthodox creeds were really made by him. We know that these men filled with the Holy Ghost, we know what these men filled by the Holy Ghost have done. We know the part that they have played. We know the souls that they have saved and the bodies they have destroyed. We know the consolation they have given and the pain they have inflicted, the lies they have defended, the truths they have denied. We know that they convinced millions that celibacy was the greatest of all virtues, that women are perpetual temptations, the enemies of true holiness, that monks and priests are nobler than fathers, that nuns are purer than mothers. We know that they taught the blessed absurdity of the Trinity, that God once worked at the trade of a carpenter in Palestine. We know that they divided knowledge into sacred and profane, taught that revelation was sacred, that reason was blasphemous, that faith was holy and facts false, that the sin of Adam and Eve brought disease and pain, vice and death into the world. We know that they have taught the dogma of special providence, that all events are ordered and regulated by God, that he crowns and uncrowns kings, preserves and destroys, guards and kills, that it is the duty of man to submit to the divine will, and that no matter how much evil there may be, no matter how much suffering, how much pain and death, man should pour out his heart in thankfulness that it was not worse. Let me be understood. I do not say that I do not think that the church was dishonest, that the clergy were insincere. I admit that all religions, all creeds, all priests have been naturally produced. I admit and cheerfully admit that the believers in the supernatural have done some good, not because they believed in gods and devils, but in spite of it. I know that thousands and thousands of clergymen are honest, self denying, and humane, that they are doing what they believe to be their duty, doing what they can to induce men and women to live pure and noble lives. This is not the result of their creeds, it is because they are human. What I say is that every honest teacher of the supernatural has been and is an unconscious enemy of the human race. What is the philosophy of the church, of those who believe in the supernatural? Back of all that is, back of all events, Christians put an infinite juggler who, with a wish, creates, preserves, and destroys. The world is his stage, and mankind his puppets. He fills them with wants and desires, with appetites and ambitions, with hopes and fears, with love and hate. He touches the springs, he pulls the strings, baits the hooks, sets the traps, and digs the pits. The play is a continuous performance. He watches these puppets as they struggle and fail, sees them outwit each other and themselves, leads them to every crime, watches the births and deaths, hears lullabies at cradles and the fall of clods on coffins. He has no pity. He enjoys the tragedies, the desperation, the despair, the suicides. He smiles at the murders, the assassinations, the seductions, the desertions, the abandoned babes of shame. He seeks the weak enslaved, mothers robbed of babes, the innocent in dungeons on scaffolds. He sees crimes crowned and hypocrisy robed. He withholds the pen. He withholds the rain, and his puppets starve. He opens the earth, and they are devoured. He sends the flood, and they are drowned. He empties the volcano, and they perish in fire. He sends the cyclone, and they are torn and mangled. With quick lightnings, they are dashed to death. He fills the air and water with the invisible enemies of life, the messengers of pain, and watches the puppets as they breathe and drink. He creates cancers to feed upon their flesh, their quivering nerves, serpents to fill their veins with venom, beasts to crunch their bones, to lap their blood. Some of the poor puppets he makes insane, makes them struggle in the darkness with imagined monsters with glaring eyes and dripping jaws, and some are made without the flame of thought, to drool and drivel through the darkened days. He sees all the agony, the injustice, the rags of poverty, the withered hands of want, the motherless babes, the deformed, the maimed, the leprous, knows the tears that flow, hears the sobs and moans, sees the gleam of swords, hears the roar of guns, sees the fields reddened with blood, the white faces of the dead. But he mocks when their fear cometh, and at their calamity he fills the heavens with laughter, and the poor puppets who are left alive fall on their knees and thank the juggler with all their hearts. But after all, the gods have not supported the children of men. Men have supported the gods. They have built the temples. They have sacrificed their babes, their lambs, their cattle. They have drenched the altars with blood. They have given their silver, their gold, their gems. They have fed and clothed their priests, but the gods have given them nothing in return. Hidden in the shadows, they have answered no prayer, heard no cry, given no sign, extended no hand, uttered no word. Unseen and unheard, they have sat on their thrones, deaf and dumb, paralyzed and blind. In vain the steeples rise, in vain the prayers ascend. and think what man has done to please the gods. He has renounced his reason, extinguished the torch of his brain. He has believed without evidence and against evidence. He has slandered and maligned himself. He has fasted and starved. He has mutilated his body, scarred his flesh, given his blood to vermin. He has persecuted, imprisoned, and destroyed his fellows. He has deserted wife and child. He has lived alone in the desert. He has swung censers and burned incense, counted beads and sprinkled himself with holy water, shut his eyes, clasped his hands, fallen upon his knees, and groveled in the dust. But the gods have been silent, silent as stones. Have these cringings have these cringings and crawlings, these cruelties and absurdities, this faith and foolishness pleased the gods? We do not know. Has any disaster been averted, any blessing obtained? We do not know. Shall we thank these gods? Shall we thank the church's God? Who and what is he? They say that he is the creator and preserver of all that has been, of all that is, of all that will be, that he is the father of angels and devils, the architect of heaven and hell, that he made the earth, a man and a woman, that he made the serpent who tempted them, made his own rival, gave victory to his enemy, that he repented of what he had done, that he sent a flood and destroyed all of the children of men with the exception of 8 persons, that he tried to civilize the survivors and their children, tried to do this with earthquakes and fiery serpents, with pestilence and famine. But he failed. He intended to fail. Then he was born into the world, preached for 3 years, and allowed some savages to kill him. Then he rose from the dead and went back to heaven. He knew that he would fail, knew that he would be killed. In fact, he arranged everything himself and brought everything to pass just as he had predestined it an eternity before the world was. All who believe these things will be saved, and they who doubt or deny will be lost. Has this good God good sense? Not always. He creates his own enemies and plots against himself. Nothing lives except in accordance with his will, and yet the devils do not die. What is the matter with this God? Well, sometimes he is foolish, sometimes he is cruel, and sometimes he is insane. Does this God exist? Is there any intelligence back of nature? Is there any being anywhere among the stars who pities the suffering children of men? We do not know. Shall we thank nature? Does nature care for us more than for leaves or grass or flies? Does nature know that we exist? We do not know. But we do know that nature is going to murder us all. Why should we thank nature? If we thank God or nature for the sunshine and rain, for health and happiness, whom shall we curse for famine and pestilence, for earthquake and cyclone, for disease and death? If we cannot thank the Orthodox churches, if we cannot thank the unknown, the incomprehensible, the supernatural, if we cannot thank nature, if we cannot kneel to a guess or prostrate ourselves before a perhaps, whom shall we thank? Let us see what the worldly have done. What has been accomplished by those not called, not set apart, not inspired, not filled with the Holy Ghost, by those who were neglected by all the gods. Passing over the Hindus, the Egyptians, the Greeks, and Romans, their poets, philosophers, and metaphysicians, we will come to modern times. In the 10th century after Christ, the Saracens governors of a vast empire, established colleges in Mongolia, Tartary, Persia, Mesopotamia, Syria, Egypt, North Africa, Morocco, Fez, and in Spain. The region owned by the Saracens was greater than the Roman Empire. They had not only colleges, but observatories. The sciences were taught. They introduced the 10 numerals, taught algebra and trigonometry, understood cubic equations, knew the art of surveying. They made catalogs and maps of the stars, gave the great stars the names they still bear. They ascertained the size of the earth, determined the obliquity of the ecliptic, and fixed the length of the year. They calculated eclipses, equinoxes, solstices, conjunctions of the planets, and occultations of stars. They constructed astronomical instruments. They made clocks of various kinds and were the inventors of the pendulum. They originated chemistry, discovered sulfuric and nitric acid and alcohol. They were the first to publish pharmacopoeias and dispensatories. In mechanics, they determined the laws of falling bodies. They understood the mechanical powers and the attraction of gravitation. They taught hydrostatics and determined the specific gravities of bodies. In optics, they discovered that a ray of light did not proceed from the eye to an object, but from the object to the eye. They were the manufacturers of cotton, leather, paper, and steel. They gave us the game of chess. They produced romances and novels and essays on many subjects. In their schools, they taught the modern doctrines of evolution and development. They anticipated Darwin and Spencer. These people were not Christians. They were the followers, for the most part, of an impostor, of a pretended prophet, of a false god. And yet, while the true Christians, the men selected by the true God and filled with the Holy Ghost, were tearing out the tongues of heretics, these wretches were irreverently tracing the orbits of the stars. While the true believers were flaying philosophers and extinguishing the eyes of thinkers, these godless followers of Muhammad were founding colleges, collecting manuscripts, investigating the facts of nature, and giving their attention to science. Afterward, the followers of Muhammad became the enemies of science and hated facts as intensely and honestly as Christians. Whoever has a revelation from God will defend it with all his strength, will abhor reason and deny facts. But it is well to know that we are indebted to the Moors, to the followers of Muhammad, for having laid the foundations of modern science. It is well to know that we are not indebted to the church, to Christianity, for any useful fact. It is well to know that the seeds of thought were sown in our minds by the Greeks and Romans, and that our literature came from those seeds. The great literature of our language is pagan in its thought, pagan in its beauty, pagan in its perfection. It is well to know that when Mohammedans were the friends of science, Christians were its enemies. How consoling it is to think that the friends of science, the men who educated their fellows, are now in hell, and that the men who persecuted and killed philosophers are now in heaven. Such is the justice of God. The Christians of the Middle Ages, the men who were filled with the Holy Ghost, knew all about the worlds beyond the grave, but nothing about the world in which they lived. They thought the earth was flat, a little dishing of, if anything, that it was about 5,000 years old, and that the stars were little sparkles made to beautify the night. The fact is that Christianity was in existence for 1,500 years before there was an astronomer in Christendom. No follower of Christ knew the shape of the earth. The earth was demonstrated to be a globe, not by a pope or a cardinal, not by a collection of clergymen, not by the called or the set apart, but by a sailor. Magellan left Seville, Spain, August 10th, 1519. sailed west and kept sailing west, and the ship reached Seville, the port it left, on September 7th, 1522. The world had been circumnavigated. The earth was known to be round. There had been a dispute between scriptures and a sailor. The fact took the sailor's side. In 1543, Copernicus published his book on the revolutions of the heavenly bodies. He had some idea of the vastness of the stars, of the astronomical spaces, of the insignificance of this world. Toward the close of the 16th century, Bruno, one of the greatest men this world has produced, gave his thoughts to his fellow men. He taught the plurality of worlds. He was a pantheist, an atheist, an honest man. He called the Catholic Church the triumphant beast. He was imprisoned for many years, tried, convicted, and on the 16th day of February, 1600, burned in Rome by men filled with the Holy Ghost. Burned on the spot where now his monument rises. Bruno, the noblest, the greatest of all the martyrs, the only one who suffered death for what he believed to be the truth, the only martyr who had no heaven to gain, no hell to shun, no God to please. He was nobler than inspired men, grander than prophets, greater and purer than apostles. Above all the theologians of the world, above the makers of creeds, above the founders of religions, rose this serene, unselfish, and intrepid man. Yet Christians, followers of Christ, murdered this incomparable man. These Christians were true to their creed. They believed that faith would be rewarded with eternal joy and doubt punished with eternal pain. They were logical. They were pious and pitiless, devout and devilish, meek and malicious, religious and revengeful, Christ-like and cruel, loving with their mouths and hating with their hearts, and yet honest victims of ignorance and fear. What have the worldly done? In 1608, Lippersheim, a Hollander, so arranged lenses that objects were exaggerated. He invented the telescope. He gave countless worlds to our eyes and made us citizens of the universe. In 1610, on the night of January the 7th, Galileo demonstrated the truth of the Copernican system, and in 1632 published his work on the system of the world. What did the church do? Galileo was arrested, imprisoned, forced to fall upon his knees, put his hand on the Bible, and recant. For 10 years he was kept in prison, for 10 years until released by the pity of death. Then the churchmen, filled with the Holy Ghost, denied his body burial in consecrated ground. It was feared that his dust might corrupt the bodies of those who had persecuted him. In 1609, Kepler published his book, Motions of the Planet Mars. He too knew of the attraction of gravitation and that it acted in proportion to mass and distance. Kepler announced his 3 laws. He found and mathematically expressed the relation of distance, mass, and motion. Nothing greater has been accomplished by the human mind. Astronomy became a science and Christianity a superstition. Then came Newton, Herschel, and Laplace. The astronomy of Joshua and Elijah faded from the minds of intelligent men, and Jehovah became an ignorant tribal god. Men began to see the operations of nature were not subject to interference, that eclipses were not caused by the wrath of God, that comets had nothing to do with the destruction of empires or the death of kings, that the stars wheeled in their orbits without regard to the actions of men. In the sacred East, the dawn appeared. What have the worldly done? A few years ago, men became wicked enough to use their senses. They began to look and listen. They began to really see, and they began to reason. They forgot heaven and hell long enough to take some interest in this world. They began to examine soils and rocks. They noticed what had been done by rivers and seas. They found out something about the crust of the earth. They found that most of the rocks had been deposited and stratified in the water, rocks 70,000 feet in thickness. They found that the coal was once vegetable matter. They made the best calculations they could of the time required to make the coal and concluded that it must have taken at least 6 or 7 millions of years. They examined the chalk cliffs, found that they were composed of the microscopic shells of minute organisms, that is to say, the dust of these shells. This dust settled over areas as large as Europe, and in some places the chalk is a mile in depth. This must have required many millions of years. Lyell, the highest authority on the subject, says that it must have required, to cause the changes that we know, at least 200 million years. Think of these vast deposits caused by the slow falling of infinitesimal atoms of impalpable dust through the silent depths of ancient seas. Think of the microscopical forms of life, constructed their minute houses of lime, giving life to others, leaving their mansions beneath the waves, and so through countless generations, building the foundations of continents and islands. Go back of all life that we now know. Back of all the flying lizards, the armored monsters, the hissing serpents, the winged and fanged horrors. Back to the Laurentian rocks, to the Eozoon, the first of living things that we have found. Back of all mountains, seas, and rivers, back to the first incrustation of the molten world. Back of wave of fire and robe of flame, back to the time when all the substance of the earth blazed in the glowing sun with all the stars that wheel about the central fire. Think of the days and nights that lie between. Think of the centuries, the withered leaves of time that strew the desert of the past. Nature does not hurry. Time cannot be wasted, cannot be lost. The future remains eternal, and all the past is as though it had not been, as though it were to be. The infinite knows neither loss nor gain. We know something of the history of the world, something of the human race, and we know that man has lived and struggled through want and war, through pestilence and famine, through ignorance and crime, through fear and hope, on the old earth for millions and millions of years. At least we know that infallible popes and countless priests and clergymen who had been called, filled with the Holy Ghost, and presidents of colleges, kings, emperors, and executives of nations had mistaken the blundering guesses of ignorant savages for the wisdom of an infinite God. At last we know that the story of creation, of the beginning of things, as told in the sacred book, is not only untrue, but utterly absurd and idiotic. Now we know that the inspired writers did not know, and that the God who inspired them did not know. We are no longer misled by myths and legends. We rely upon facts. The world is our witness, and the stars testify for us. What have the worldly done? They have investigated the religions of the world, have read the sacred books, the prophecies, the commandments, the rules of conduct. They have studied the symbols, the ceremonies, the prayers and sacrifices, and they have shown that all religions are substantially the same, produced by the same causes, that all rest on a misconception of the facts in nature, that all are founded on ignorance and fear, on mistake and mystery. They have found that Christianity is like the rest, that it was not a revelation, but a natural growth, that its gods and devils, its heavens and hells were borrowed, that its ceremonies and sacraments were souvenirs of other religions, that no part of it came from heaven, but that it was all made by savage man. They have found that Jehovah was a tribal god and that his ancestors had lived on the banks of the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Ganges, and the Nile. These ancestors were traced back to still more savage forms. They found that all the sacred books were filled with inspired mistake and sacred absurdity. But say the Christians, we have the only inspired book. We have the Old Testament and the New. Where did you get the Old Testament? From the Jews? Yes. Let me tell you about it. After the Jews returned from Babylon about 400 years before Christ, Ezra commenced making the Bible. You will find an account of this in the Bible. We know that Genesis was written after the captivity because it was from the Babylonians that the Jews got the story of the creation, of Adam and Eve, of the garden, of the serpent and the tree of life, of the flood, and from them they learned about the Sabbath. You find nothing about that holy day in Judges, Joshua, Samuel, Kings, or Chronicles, nothing in Job, the Psalms, in Esther, Solomon's Song, or Ecclesiastes, only in books written by Ezra after the return from Babylon. When Ezra finished the inspired book, he placed it in the temple. It was written on the skins of beasts, and so far as we know, there was but one. What became of this Bible? Jerusalem was taken by Titus about 70 years after Christ. The temple was destroyed, and at the request of Josephus, the Holy Bible was sent to Vespasian, the emperor at Rome. And this Holy Bible has never been seen or heard of since. So much for that. Then there was a copy, or rather a translation, called the Septuagint. How was that made? It is said that Ptolemy Soter and his son Ptolemy Philadelphus obtained a translation of the Jewish Bible. This translation was made by 70 persons. At that time, the Jewish Bible did not contain Daniel, Ecclesiastes, but few of the Psalms and only part of Isaiah. That what became of this translation, known as the Septuagint, it was burned in the Bruchium Library 47 years before Christ. Then there was another so-called copy of part of the Bible, known as the Samaritan Roll of the Pentateuch, but this is not considered of any value. We have a true copy of the Bible that was in the temple at Jerusalem, the one sent to Vespasian. Have we a true copy of the Bible that was in the temple at Jerusalem, the one sent to Vespasian? Nobody knows. Have we a true copy of the Septuagint? Nobody knows. What is the oldest manuscript of the Bible we have in Hebrew? The oldest manuscript we have in Hebrew was written in the 10th century after Christ. The oldest pretended copy we have of the Septuagint, written in Greek, was made in the 5th century after Christ. If the Bible was divinely inspired, if it was the actual Word of God, we have no authenticated copy. The original has been lost, and we are left in the darkness of nature. It is impossible for us to show that our Bible is correct. We have no standard. Many of the books in our Bible contradict each other. Many chapters appear to be incomplete, and parts of different books are written in the same words, showing that both could not have been original. The 19th and 20th chapters of 2 Kings and the 37th and 38th chapters of Isaiah are exactly the same. So is the 36th chapter of Isaiah from the 2nd verse, the same as the 18th chapter of 2 Kings from the 2nd verse. So it is perfectly apparent that there could have been no possible propriety in inspiring the writers of Kings and the writers of Chronicles. The books are substantially the same, differing in a few mistakes, in a few falsehoods. The same is true of Leviticus and Numbers. The books do not agree either in facts or philosophy. They differ as the men differed who wrote them. What have the worldly done? They have investigated the phenomena of nature. They have invented ways to use the forces of the world, the weight of falling water, of moving air. They have changed water to steam, invented engines, the tireless giants that work for man. They have made lightning a messenger and a slave. They invented movable type, taught us the art of printing, and made it possible to save and transmit the intellectual wealth of the world. They connected continents with cables, cities and towns with the telegraph, brought the world into one family, made intelligence independent of distance. They taught us how to build homes, to obtain food, and to weave cloth. They covered the seas with iron ships, and the land with roads and steeds of steel. They gave us the tools of all the trades, the implements of labor. They chiseled statues, painted pictures, and witched the world with form and color. They have found the cause of and the cure for many maladies that afflict the flesh and minds of men. They have given us the instruments of music, and the great composers and performers have changed the common air to tones and harmonies that intoxicate, exalt, and purify the soul. They have rescued us from the prisons of fear and snatched our souls from the fangs and claws of superstition's loathsome, crawling, flying beasts. They have given us the liberty to think and the courage to express our thoughts. They have changed the frightened, the enslaved, the kneeling, the prostrate into men and women, clothed them in their right minds, and made them truly free. They have uncrowned the phantoms, wrested the scepters from the ghosts, and given this world to the children of men. They have driven from the heart the fiends of fear and extinguished the flames of hell. They have read a few leaves of the great volume, deciphered some of the records written on stone by the tireless hands of time in the dim past. They have told us something of what has been done by wind and wave, by fire and frost, by life and death, the ceaseless workers, the pauseless forces of the world. They have enlarged the horizon of the known, changed the glittering specks that shine above us to wheeling worlds, and filled all space with countless suns. They have found the qualities of substances, the nature of things, how to analyze, separate, and combine, and have enabled us to use the good and avoid the hurtful. They have given us mathematics in the higher forms, by means of which we measure the astronomical spaces, the distances to stars, the velocity at which the heavenly bodies move, their density and weight, and by which the mariner navigates the waste and trackless seas. They have given us all we have of knowledge, of literature and art. They have made life worth living. They have filled the world with conveniences, comforts, and luxuries. All this has been done by the worldly, by those who were not called or set apart, or filled with the Holy Ghost, or had the slightest claim to apostolic succession. The men who accomplished these things were not inspired. They had no revelation, no supernatural aid. They were not clad in sacred vestments, and tiaras were not upon their brows. They were not even ordained. They used their senses, observed and recorded facts. They had confidence in reason. They were patient searchers for the truth. They turned their attention to the affairs of this world. They were not saints, they were sensible men. They worked for themselves, for wife and child, and for the benefit of all. To these men, we are indebted for all we are, for all we know, for all we have. They were the creators of civilization, the founders of free states, the saviors of liberty, the destroyers of superstition, and the great captains in the army of progress. Whom shall we thank? Standing here at the close of the 19th century, amid the trophies of thought, the triumphs of genius, here under the flag of the great republic, knowing something of the history of man, here on this day that has been set apart for Thanksgiving, I most reverently thank the good men, the good women of the past. I thank the kind fathers, the loving mothers of the savage days. I thank the father who spoke the first gentle word, the mother who first smiled upon her babe. I thank the first true friend. I thank the savages who hunted and fished that they and their babes might live. I thank those who cultivated the ground and changed the forest into farms, those who built rude homes and watched the faces of their happy children in the glow of fireside flames, those who domesticated horses, cattle, and sheep, those who invented wheels and looms and taught us to spin and weave, those who by cultivation changed wild grasses into wheat and corn, changed bitter things to fruit and worthless weeds to flowers, that sowed within our souls the seeds of art. I thank the poets of the dawn, the tellers of legends, the makers of myths, the singers of joy and grief, of hope and love. I thank the artist who chiseled forms in stone and wrought with light and shade the face of man. I thank the philosophers, the thinkers, who taught us how to use our minds in the great search for truth. I thank the astronomers who explored the heavens, told us the secrets of the stars, the glories of the constellations, the geologists who found the story of the world in fossil forms, in memoranda kept in ancient rocks, in lines written by waves, by frost and fire, the anatomists who sought in muscle, nerve, and bone for all the mysteries of life, the chemists who unraveled nature's work that they might learn her art, the physicians who have laid the hand of science on the brow of pain, the hand whose magic touch restores, the surgeons who have defeated nature's self and forced her to preserve the lives of those she labored to destroy. I thank the discoverers of chloroform and ether, the two angels who give their beloved sleep and wrap the throbbing brain in the soft robes of dreams. I thank the great inventors, those who gave us movable type and the press, by means of which great thoughts of all discovered facts are made immortal, the inventors of engines, of the great ships, the railways, the cables, and telegraphs. I thank the great mechanics, the workers in iron and steel, in wood and stone. I thank the inventors and makers of the numberless things of use and luxury. I thank the industrious men, the loving mothers, the useful women. They are the benefactors of our race. The inventor of pins did 1,000 times more good than all the popes and cardinals, the bishops and priests, than all the clergymen and parsons, exhorters and theologians that have ever lived. The inventor of matches did more for the comfort and convenience of mankind than all the founders of religions and the makers of all creeds, than all malicious monks and selfish saints. I thank the honest men and women who have expressed their sincere thoughts, who have been true to themselves, and have preserved the veracity of their souls. I thank the I thank the thinkers of Greece and Rome, Zeno and Epicurus, Cicero and Lucretius. I thank Bruno, the bravest, and Spinoza, the subtlest of men. I thank Voltaire, whose thought lighted a flame in the brain of man, unlocked the doors of superstition's cells, and gave liberty to many millions of his fellow men. Voltaire, a name that sheds light. Voltaire, a star that superstition's darkness cannot quench. I thank the great poets, the dramatists. I thank Homer and Aeschylus, and I thank Shakespeare above them all. I thank Burns for the heartthrobs he changed into songs, for his lyrics and flames. I thank Shelley for his skylark, Keats for his Grecian urn, and Byron for his prisoner of Chillon. I thank the great novelists. I thank the great sculptors. I thank the unknown man who molded and chiseled the Venus de Milo. I thank the great painters. I thank Rembrandt and Corot. I thank all who have or don't have adorned, enriched, and ennobled life. All who have created the great, the noble, the heroic, and artistic ideals. I thank the statesmen who have preserved the rights of man. I thank Paine, whose genius sowed the seeds of independence in the hearts of 76. I thank Jefferson, whose mighty words for liberty have made the circuit of the globe. I thank the founders, the defenders, the saviors of the Republic. I thank Ericsson, the greatest mechanic of his century, for the Monitor. I thank Lincoln for the Proclamation. I thank Grant for his victories and the vast host that fought for the right, for the freedom of man. I thank them all, the living and the dead. I thank the great scientists, those who have reached the foundation, the bedrock, who have built upon facts, the great scientists in whose presence theologians look silly and feel malicious. The scientists never persecuted, never imprisoned their fellow man. They forged no chains, built no dungeons, erected no scaffolds, tore no flesh with red-hot pincers, dislocated no joints on racks, crushed no bones in iron boots, extinguished no eyes, tore out no tongues, and lighted no faggots. They did not pretend to be inspired, did not claim to be prophets or saints, or to have been born again. They were only intelligent and honest men. They did not appeal to force or fear. They did not regard men as slaves to be ruled by torture, by lash and chain, nor as children to be cheated with illusions, rocked in the cradle of an idiot creed, and soothed by a lullaby of lies. They did not wound, they healed. They did not kill, they lengthened life. They did not enslave, they broke the chains and made men free. They sowed the seeds of knowledge, and many millions have reaped, are reaping, and will reap the harvest of joy. I thank Humboldt and Helmholtz and Haeckel and Buchner. I thank Lamarck and Darwin, Darwin who revolutionized the thought of the intellectual world. I thank Huxley and Spencer. I thank the scientists one and all. I thank the heroes, the destroyers of prejudice and fear, the dethroners of savage gods, the extinguishers of hate's eternal fire, the heroes, the breakers of chains, the founders of free states, the makers of just laws, the heroes who fought and fell on countless fields, the heroes whose dungeons became shrines, the heroes whose blood made scaffolds sacred, the heroes, the apostles of reason, the disciples of truth, the soldiers of freedom, the heroes who held high the holy torch and filled the world with light. With all my heart, I thank them all. You know, I learned some time ago that Robert G. Ingersoll, when his father died, he rushed to his side and barely made it to his side for the end. And the story goes that his father was lying in his bed, clutching a black book to his chest. And he asked his son to read to him a passage from that book. This is the Reverend John Ingersoll. And that his son, expecting the book to be the Bible, and of course, complying with his father's request. Took the book and was surprised to find that it was Plato's account of the death of Socrates. It's a pretty remarkable thing to consider that while they have not always been celebrated, godless thinkers like Robert G. Ingersoll have been present in every generation. Of course, victors write the history books. And so you'll hear the Sermon on the Mount much more often than you'll hear this Thanksgiving sermon. You'll read books and stories and hear stories of Luke 2. You'll hear the stories of Jesus, mouthing off to his mother more often than you will hear or read any of the many quotes from The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. The fact that we can celebrate fictions in the Bible as if they are true and neglect the truths that can be found in wise sayings by men like Carl Sagan, Christopher Hitchens. Incredible truths that are said plainly so that people in their day can understand them. And we happen to be fortunate that they are modern enough that we understand them really well. I think about Robert G. Ingersoll. He said once that of all the great resentments, this is not, of course, not a direct quote, but of all the great resentments he had of his life, the greatest was that his father, who was a good man, who believed in God, preached about God, preached from the Holy Book, nonetheless was defrocked by his own church because his ideas were too liberal. That was the feeling of a man who became known as the great agnostic, a man who went and fought in the Civil War, denied and rejected his own party. He was once a candidate for the Democratic Party, which was pro-slavery largely at the time. Abandoned them when Lincoln and the Republicans rose. But then while he was fighting for the Union in Tennessee, often criticized Lincoln rather fairly for the misconduct of the war and for all the countless number of men who had died, men and women, who died in that war because of Lincoln's insufficiencies, because of Lincoln's prejudices. But at the end, ended up being one of Lincoln's greatest supporters because of the Emancipation Proclamation, because of the 13th Amendment, because he could see that whatever his differences with great significant people from his era, he could make common cause with any man or woman who fought against slavery. The first of the writings that I put into this collection was another lecture that he gave called Why I Am Agnostic. And in there, I'm thinking actually of, I have it written down here. I always say it a little bit wrong. How to Reform Mankind, excuse me. It was delivered at the Columbia Theater in Chicago in 1896. This is at the turn of what will become the 20th century. And a whole segment of this godless man's appeal to the modern age for the 20th century was on housing. On how immoral it was that for all the advancements that we had made as a society and as Americans in particular, that there should be anybody in a tenement house, in a shelter. He said it was absolutely preposterous when there were resources to house every woman and child, every man, every person. And a little bit of organization, a little bit of effort, a little bit of value in our human hearts and love and care for one another, unhousing would become a thing of the past. That sounds exactly like the thinking of a man who raised an entire regiment of his fellow Americans to go and fight against slavery. And spent the rest of his life preaching against religion. The son of a preacher who read to his father on his deathbed at his own request the story of the death of Socrates instead of the crucifixion of Jesus and his resurrection. Over the course of 25 years that I've been an atheist, I have been astounded at the crime of forgetting our great godless people. People like Joe Hill, a man who dared to take a sacred hymn that the Salvation Army would sing on a street corner, while the police, an institution that didn't exist a decade before the labor movement started, that the police were arresting Joe Hill and the Wobblies, the labor activists, for preaching about the unions. You imagine a bunch of drunk bums on a street corner preaching to their fellow men, their fellow workers, their fellow laborers, many of them not even from there, just rode in off the rails, having bummed a ride on a boxcar. And while they were being arrested by the police, the Salvation Army would stand on that opposite corner to their soapboxes, and the phrase to get up on your soapbox, that's where it comes from, and sing their song in the sweet by and by. And it was Joe Hill, a man who can't, honestly, I don't know that he ever really said anything particularly atheistic. He certainly said a lot of things about how he didn't believe in the church, how he didn't believe in religion. He would have been labeled an atheist by pretty much anybody who believes in using that label. After all, the sermon you just heard was delivered by a man who was known at the time as the great agnostic. And what person listening to that screed would not think these were the words of an atheist? How was anything that Robert G. Ingersoll said in that sermon any more provocative or any more controversial, hurtful, any more or less contradictory than anything you would read in the God delusion, or God is not great, or the end of faith, or the Korihor argument. How was this man not an atheist? How was Joe Hill not an atheist? They didn't consider themselves atheists. This is why it always stuns me when I wind up making videos on TikTok answering Christians who say atheists don't know the difference between atheists and agnostics. And that if you claim to be open to the idea that God could be real and that you don't know whether or not God is real, then you're not an atheist, you're an agnostic. I have to ask, who is atheist? Who's an atheist then? It turns out that being agnostic, being godless, is nothing more than being honest with yourself and with other people. What happened to that value? When did we forget that the thing that the clergy of countless churches, not starting with the Catholics, but certainly not ending with them either, is really just lying? Thomas Paine called that out. Thomas Paine, who was happy to tell the whole world in one of the most controversial tracts ever written, The Age of Reason, that he believed in nature and nature's God. He was a deist. Even Robert Ingersoll and his brother, sons of a preacher, were known to their neighbors as being deists. It wasn't until he started to lecture for decades on how wrong the church was about pretty much everything that they began to call him the great agnostic. And it wasn't until he himself used that term in his lecture, Why I Am Agnostic, that people began to attribute to him this thing that was this term that was considered so shameful in the minds of so many. And yet this man was the most well-received lecturer in America in the 19th century. He was one of the most well-paid. You consider, like I told you, his father had to move the boys and his new wife around all their childhood, going from odd job to odd job because they wouldn't let him preach anymore because his ideas were too liberal in Illinois, Peoria, Illinois, particularly. And he had to go wherever there was work. And yet this man ended up in Peoria, Illinois, having constructed what was at the time the largest mansion in Illinois, in town at least, in Peoria at least. And it was a house that cost $50,000 to build, which at that time was quite a significant amount of money. And it took something like 4 years to build or something like this. It was a 4-story house. He was extremely wealthy. Now, of course, at the time, he was a practicing trial lawyer and apparently a successful one. But largely, he attributed the building of that house to the speaking fees he collected from all of the people who booked months in advance to hear him speak because he was such a great orator. I haven't confirmed this yet, but I read somewhere that he spoke at the funerals both of Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln. I'd like to verify that that's true, because that's remarkable. Two of the greatest orators. It may not seem that way about Abraham Lincoln, but he was considered a remarkable speaker, at least during his presidential years. It wasn't quite such a great speaker, as they say, when he was in Congress, but he got better at it. Whereas Robert G. Ingersoll was known all his life to be one of these great speakers. But as you can tell from the rant I just read to you, a lot of the things he wrote were not literature. We're not literary genius. A lot of it was repetition. It was rhetoric. I mentioned this on a live of Mormonism After Dark, Mormon discussions. I think it flew over. I think it was just late. But it flew right past RFM. Those of you who know Mormonism, Mormon discussion, these people on this podcast. Anyway, but I said, gone are the days of Mormon rhetoric. And I didn't understand that until after I'd left Mormonism. And I mentioned it because RFM had said something about how the last true great moving sermon he had heard was the testimony of Mormon doctrine, Bruce R. McConkie. I happen to mention it. I don't think most people know this, but even in the days of Joseph Smith, he was known and celebrated at that time, not just by Mormons, as a great sermonizer. Rhetoric is an art in of itself. Anybody who doesn't believe it would have a hard time justifying why Shakespeare is still so loved. They say that in this mansion that Robert G. Ingersoll had, in the foyer, he kept a bust of William Shakespeare. And when he would come into the house, he would take his hat off and he would place it with a little jaunt on the head of William Shakespeare. And he kept on his coffee table, or like a reception area, he kept a large version of the collected works of Shakespeare. The spoken word was an important part of the history of the movement. And to think that for all these many centuries, forgotten to time for the most part because of the influence of the church, there were people who spoke. We don't know how many. Surely there must have been more. Surely Robert G. Ingersoll was not the first, and we know for a fact that he wasn't the first, to challenge the conventions of religion. How many of them have been lost to time because people in power feared that God would punish them if they didn't, feared that they would bring pestilence or famine to their families and their homes and their nations if God were displeased with them because they had the audacity to speak the truth. Robert G. Ingersoll was not an anomaly just because he was a gifted orator. I've heard him speak. He was fine. He was a remarkable anomaly because he could speak plainly and honestly, and people understood and felt the sincerity of his words. And that was a rare gift then, and it's a rare gift now. It's one that we must celebrate. I can't help but wonder what Robert G. Ingersoll, who died in the early 20th century, would think of our day. How disgusted he would be at how just over 100 years later, actually quite a bit longer than 100 years, as I said last night on Latter Daily Digest, and I've said many times, for me, the 1990s were 10 years ago. I'm a Gen Xer to a fault. That over 100 years after he had passed, we would live in a nation, the nation he fought to liberate, He fought to keep free. It would become a nation where people were not able to find homes that they could afford in the same communities where they work. I see it every day. Driving down here in Washington County, Utah, I see homes that are enormous, and many of them are homes that house big families, but some of them are just not. Some of them are just the opulence of wealth. Meanwhile, just north of here in Salt Lake County, they're talking about building a concentration camp to start herding unsheltered people into. Having been out on those streets and going back out again now officially going into 2026, we're doing it again and on a bigger scale. I know what it's like to talk to a person and see how circumstances beyond their control took them a short distance from the dispassionate ignorance and neglect of people who were unsheltered to being one of them. And I hear it in conversations I have almost on a daily basis now with people who find out that I'm living in my car and ask me sincerely, genuinely, with concern that I appreciate, and say, "Are you okay? Are you kidding me? I'm beyond okay. When I'm in town, I have a bed that belonged to my niece who's at college in a home where I'm fed 3 square meals a day, whether I like it or not, by a mother who raised me, a very good Mexican mama who was terrified if I got skinny. It might be because I was sick. Surrounded by people who loved me, help me out when I'm in trouble. And when I'm on the road, I have a roof over my head, a bed that I built myself, and was able to put a mattress on thanks to our good friend Sally, and go and visit people who believe in what I'm doing. People like Mary Beth, people like Winter. Hello? I have a meal set on the table. Thanks, Mom. It would be nice for everybody who can come to eat now would be a good start. I'll be there. I've seen real poverty. I've seen real suffering out on those streets. And I said a year ago, when we started the Church of Korihor, it's only a matter of time before Donald Trump. And again, I don't discriminate against people who voted for Donald Trump or support Donald Trump. You're welcome in our movement. You're welcome to be a part of what we're doing. I'm not going to tell you how to vote or anybody else how to vote, but I'm not going to hide mine. I'm not going to hide my politics. I'm not going to preach you politics, but I'm not going to hide it. And I said a year ago, from a moral standpoint, that if Donald Trump gets a chance, he's going to follow through on his threat to create concentration camps to put unsheltered people in. And now in Utah, they're building it. Our legislature, our governor are for it. And they're going to start rounding these people up and putting them into treatment or rounding people up for immigration, and you say that's nothing like a concentration camp, then you don't know what a concentration camp is. Go up and open up a book and read about Poland in the 30s and 40s. Charlatans never change, and neither do the Christo-fascists. And now, in a state that 20 years ago was one of the most affordable places to live, considered widely to be one of the best places to raise a family of 3 can't afford a home on the income of 2. How much we have regressed in progress. I was reading yesterday, boy, don't do this until you're ready for it. I was reading yesterday from the reports by the Department of Labor, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, excuse me, about how many jobs were lost in October. It's no wonder to me that they fired the person whose job it is to publish that information and to release it to the press. You hardly hear about it on the news, but guess what? The department still exists so far, and the information still gets published. Because it turns out a government's made up of more than one person, and the bureaucracy continues to function so far. They'll shut it down eventually. They don't want anybody to know that once again in 2025, we have set the record for the most number of Americans to die by hunger since in history, a growing trend that has been accelerating since the first cuts to SNAP benefits in 2017 by the first Trump administration. Again, vote how you want. You're welcome to be a part of this. I'm not trying to shame anybody for how they vote. But this is what was done. Elections have consequences, and we're living in it. At the same time, the fastest growing segment, that's my nephew, he's fine. He just likes to be loud. Might have a touch of autism there. I'm not good. He's a beautiful kid. That in this day and age, the fastest growing spiritual movement that exists in America are the nuns. They may not call themselves atheists. You may not call yourselves atheists. I'm cool with it. I did that dance for 10 years after leaving Mormonism and told people, I'm not an atheist, I'm an agnostic. And before that, I'm not really an agnostic, I'm just not Mormon anymore. And I just don't know about God. But you find this. You say the wrong thing. You say something as simple, innocent, and true, like Dan McClellan, Mormon man who is a biblical scholar, has just published a book called The Bible Doesn't Say That. And most of his fans, as far as I know, are not Mormons. They're ex-Mormons. They're atheists. They're agnostics. You listen to this guy talk about the Bible, and he will tell you plainly that Lucifer and Satan are not the same. He'll tell you plainly that Yahweh was just one of the many gods worshipped in ancient Palestine and by the people that you think of as being the Israelites, who it turns out were not quite the group that we thought that they were. And for that, he is, while maintaining to everyone, when they ask him, how do you maintain that you are a Mormon and say these things, that you're a Christian and say these things? And he defends himself and says he still is Mormon. He still has faith. He still believes in God. Because even if you believe in God, They'll call you an atheist if your ideas conflict with their hope of believing what they think is true about God. And there you have what an atheist actually is. Atheist is a label. They would have called Robert G. Ingersoll an atheist. I'm sure many of them do. Because it became, and people I love very much, people very close to me, very dear to me, when they hear me take the label atheist, will try to defend me to myself and have told me, a good friend of mine put his hand on my arm and said, I don't think of you like an atheist. And I said, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But that is exactly the problem, is that I'm saying atheist because I'm happy to take that label, to make it clear that the worst fears you have about what I believe are true. I think you are wrong. I think you would be better off if you didn't believe things, if you didn't have faith in things that are not true. Doesn't mean that I am a rude person who has to go to every person I love or even to the whole world and say, stop believing the stupid things that you claim to believe. I can perfectly well comprehend there are things that we disagree about and that don't have to be brought up in every moment. As Winston Churchill said, a fanatic is a man who can't change his mind and won't change the damn subject. We can change the subject. But the fact of the matter is, the atheist is not a description of what a person believes or disbelieves. Atheist, whether it's what it says in the dictionary or not, is a label to shame human beings who differ in their beliefs from your beliefs, and do so in a way you find immoral because you are concerned that you will start to doubt your faith if you listen to somebody speaking honestly about it. If that is an atheist, you can label this agnostic an atheist. I'm happy to take it. What's more, take it even further. I tell people who are Mormons all the time, who were happy before I took on any such label, when they found out I had left the church and what criticisms I had about the Book of Mormon or about Joseph Smith or about the priesthood. I found out that I had lost my faith in God while I was a missionary in Peru. Were happy to call me a Korahor. Was a character in the Book of Mormon who was shamed and even killed for teaching that he did not say. It says in the Book of Mormon, now in the Korahor canon, by the way, it's now part of the Korahor canon. He says, I did not say that there was no God, but I do not believe that there is a God. And for saying that in the story of the Book of Mormon, he is cursed by a wicked Christian sorcerer to have his voice removed from him. Now, this, of course, literally didn't happen. This is a myth. It's a legend. But think of the subconscious confession in that. To prove to him that God was real, they censored him. To prove to him that God was real, they took his voice and told him it was so that he could not corrupt the minds of other people. And when he pleads with them, with Alma, to give him back his voice, even goes so far in duress to say, oh no, I understand. I always knew there was a God, but I was deceived by an angel of the devil, as if that is a thing, who disguised as an angel of light taught me everything I should say, as if that made sense. Still, Alma wouldn't do it. The wicked Christian sorcerer or prophet, whatever you want to call it, wouldn't do it. Instead, condemned him to being unhoused, to being hungry. And from the apathy of his Christian neighbors, died in the streets. Joseph Smith didn't realize, I'm sure, at the time, or if he did, I hope it bothered him to no end, the tacit confession made in the story of Korihor. When people called me a Korihor when I left the church, it was to mock me, to make me feel stupid, to make me feel laughed at. But if anybody actually knew the story of Korihor, I don't know any person who considers themselves honest with themselves and with others who would be ashamed of such a label. So I say, call me an atheist. Yes, I'll take it. If that's what you fear an atheist is, that's me. But worse than that, more than that, call me a Korihor. Because I am not only questioning of your faith and the faith of all persons and the beliefs of all persons, including and especially myself. I'm proud to teach other people to do the same. I'm proud to hold up people who will do the same. And if I wind up unhoused for it, which some would say I am, well, that would only make sense. As it turns out, that's more of a factor of economics of modern America, of the modern American economy, and frankly, my own desire to be able to move about the country to spread the message of Korihorism. But then serving other people who are unsheltered or in economic distress, people who are food insecure, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't go back and do it any other way. I wouldn't go back and buy a house back when there were affordable houses, whenever that was. I don't even remember. I wouldn't get stuck somewhere where I would be afraid to run away and go out there and do something that actually made a difference. But I'll tell you what, sleeping on the road, even in the security of a van where I have a heater when it gets cold, an air conditioner when it gets hot, where I have a computer that I can set up and work from, still haven't quite figured that out. I think we maybe finally have a solution to that, how I can work from the van when I'm out on the road. I know how much worse it can be. I've seen people who need help. And while churches that have billions, even hundreds of billions of dollars in assets and in liquidity, turn their back on people. Thank you. Turn their back on people who are hungry in this country, who are cold, and laugh about Korihor in the same breath. To be out there and doing something that actually changes things. I feel connected to the mission that Robert G. Ingersoll continued. Not even started, as even he said in that very sermon. Pain was a big part of it. Jefferson was a part of it, and he was a rich, spoiled brat, and for lack of a better term, an asshole. But he believed, and he believed in God. But he also believed that the stories of the Gospels were as he claimed it when he created the so-called Jefferson Bible, the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth. He called it selecting the parts that he believed in out of the Bible, taking a razor blade and taking the portions that he believed in English, Greek, German, and French, and pasting them into the pages of an empty journal. He once described that as a process of extracting diamonds from dunghills. And now you see why in the election of 1800, the first true election, presidential election, John Adams, his sometime friend, had newspaper editors accuse Jefferson of being an atheist, of having filled his head while he was America's minister to France during the Revolution, keeping the coffers open and flowing with money to fight the war with England and against kings. Anybody remember that at all, or is that just not part of the story? The 1776 story, you forgot all about how that was supposed to be about getting rid of kings, about getting rid of institutionalized religion. Called him an atheist because he had the audacity to refer to the Gospels as a shit heap with a few little diamonds embedded in it. Because this movement didn't start in a modern age, they'll tell you that it is the product of sin. They'll tell you that it's the product of a modern time and modern decadence. It's not. For as long as human beings have suffered, there have been people who use their voice to stop and say, this faith is not fixing the problem. It's bad enough that your faith is in something that isn't true. It's worse that it's in something and someone who is vicious. When we could ascribe to the fates what is otherwise described as a test, a punishment, or a trial by God. If we could just admit that it is blind fate, that it is circumstances, that it is nature doing only what nature does and with no malice whatsoever. But that by a little investigation, a little education, a little critical thinking, we have overcome bigger things than this. Housing in this country, we have absolutely not only the science on how to build the homes, we not only have the economics to build the homes, we even have the political science to solve it. The only reason why we don't do it is because some people in our society, on some subconscious or conscious level, have decided that some people, by circumstances entirely out of their control, have been judged by God as deserving to die. It infuriates me. It absolutely infuriates me. We can solve this problem. But the only reason we are able to do it now is because the fastest growing spiritual movement in this country is people who are non-religious. Don't call yourselves atheists. Fine. I don't care. Call yourselves agnostics or don't call yourselves agnostics. I don't care. Call yourselves Korahors. You are welcome to. As somebody who has basically taken it on for the entire movement. You're welcome, or don't. But think before you pray. If you pray, I don't care. It's fine with me. But think first. Think better. This we can all do. And any God who would try to convince us not to is not on our side. Any pope, any preacher, any reverend who would shame us for thinking and for improving our thinking is not on our side. And that's how we're going to solve things. That's how we're going to solve the crisis at hand. That's how we're going to defeat Christofascism. It's going to be dangerous, and not everybody can be a leader in it. Most of us in this movement have too much to lose. And I would have said and will say again, don't put it at risk. Don't risk more than you can lose. But I think we can start changing things. I'm going to wrap up with this. I was mentioning on Latter Daily Digest last night, very generously invited by my friend Gene. That, one of the best testaments about the Church of Korihor that I have had on our channel was my conversation with the Mormon apologist Jacob Hansen. I was stunned that he agreed to be on my program. I've tried to get him to debate me a few times, but we at least had a conversation, and I thought it was a very good one. He thought it was a good one. At least it seems to me he thought it was a good one. And he said, you know what I like about what you're doing here with the Church of Korihor? This is a Mormon guy, a very well-known Mormon apologist. I said, you know what I like about what you're doing here? Rather than like most ex-Mormons just tearing down the church, the Mormon church, you're building something. This is the same feedback I got from Stephen Pinecker at Mormon Book Reviews. Same thing that we got from our dear friend Kulch, who's, may he flourish in reason wherever he is. The same thing you hear again and again about what we're doing here is we're building something and believing in something rather than just not believing in God, not believing in the church, their church. I had a conversation recently with my very Mormon dad. He's a good man. And he said, I don't get it. You have all these meetings. You left the church. Now you go to church more often than you ever went to the church when you were a Mormon. Not quite true, but almost true, by the way. And I said, I never had anything against church. I had something against God. I'm not against church. I'm against God. I just think that the church is wasted on God. And I have a lot of people who think the same way. A lot of those people want nothing to do with anything that has the word church involved in it. I get it. And the label of it, I get it. I did that for a long time too. But for a lot of us, for a lot of people I discovered on a daily basis, they don't care. And especially if you don't have to join the church, which you don't. Anyway. This is what I want to tell you guys before we let you go. Starting this Friday, I am going to change the way we're doing podcasts for the Church of Korihor. And what we're going to do, this is the product of experience over a year that we've been doing this. I'm going to apply all the ways that we failed, that I failed particularly. in this first year to develop something new. And if we're going to fail at something, we're going to fail at this. I want to start on Fridays. And we may move that. I want to have a special kind of telethon, a fun activity, something that we can do that's not just preaching and not just teaching and not just true crime, completely independent of anything to do with true crime. As a matter of fact, that's a very real possibility. I'm going to do a lot less of that, maybe even none of it in the future. And instead, what I want to do is develop a very loosey-goosey, somewhat grassroots, entirely grassroots, and somewhat disorganized, disheveled, poorly funded, entirely, mostly unfunded campaign to take and highlight people in our communities who have asked for help. People who are hungry, people who have children who are hungry, people who need clothes, people who need blankets, people who need shelter. And we're going to start collecting these people's information as securely and safely as we can. It's going to be a little bit dangerous. I'm just going to be blunt with you. It's going to be very controversial. Well, I don't know. It's going to be. There are going to be some bumps on the road to this. But I want to put it an opportunity for people who we are going to advertise to and reach through advertisements. I've been working on the ad that we're going to run throughout the month of December and January. We're going to reach out to as many people as we can who are hungry, who are unsheltered, who are partially sheltered and food insecure, housing insecure, and people who are looking for work. And we are going to put those people up, highlight them on these calls, and see if we can't find people, other people who have resources and who have contacts for housing and have contacts for work and employment and can help to move some people to the front of the stack by hopefully giving them references. I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you listen to people out there who are looking for work, even people who have professional degrees, even those degrees in some cases as of this week that are no longer considered professional, like therapists and nurse practitioners. Thanks a lot, First Lady of Wrestling. You guys are doing great up there in Washington. I don't know if you've heard this or seen this, but it's practically impossible in this country for people to find work. And I know that from experience, virtually all the work I've gotten over the course of 30 years of work in the video industry and in video and film production, pretty much every job I got, with the exception of a very short stint with a company that buckled fast, was I got because somebody referred me, because somebody had an in with the owner of the company, with the boss of in some department, and could say, I know a guy who's looking for clients. I know a guy who's looking for a job. And I mean, I built my whole career. Apart from, working in retail when I was young, I applied for one job that I applied for and got. Otherwise, I've never gotten a job because I applied for it. In these corporations, even big or small, employment almost always is either the product of nepotism or it's a reference from a person who works in the business, who works in the company. And if we can help more people to find work, to find food, even if that means giving food out of your pantry, even if it means starting a neighborhood pantry and figuring out the logistics of how to do that, and supporting each other as we post in these communities and on our webpage at korahor.org, that I'm starting a food pantry, and then you can send, and let's all do what we can. If you have extra cans of food, extra food to send, then let's help each other and support each other in setting this thing up. And if we have people out there who are food insecure because their SNAP benefits have been eliminated, or because they've been cut, or because they've lost their jobs, let's get out there and help as many people as we can, and let's grow this movement. And in the process, when people ask me, what do I have to do to join the Church of Korahor, I'm going to say, as of now, we can talk about that if you want to. Process is not that hard, but you don't have to. You want to help us? Just help us. Get on the call. And let's start having a regular live broadcast where we highlight people who need help. And if you send a can of formula to a mother who needs it to feed her child, or a month's supply of it, hopefully, or more, and want a tax receipt for it, I will set you up with one. You donate, you give a can of formula to a mother who with a child she can't feed. That's a donation to the Church of Korahor as of now. You got a can of soup to feed an Antifa family, or whatever kind of family, a hungry family. That's a donation to the Church of Korahor. Tell me how much you spent on it, and I'll put it into a receipt and I'll send it to you. If you can put somebody up on your property who needs a home while they get back on their feet, give somebody a suit or a dress so they can go to apply for a job. Set somebody up with a vehicle, with a van or a truck or a car that you're not using, and you'd be happy to give to a person who otherwise might wind up sleeping rough on the streets this cold winter. And you give it away to that person. Great. How much was it worth to you? I'll put it down into a receipt. You put it in with your receipts, give it to your accountant. When they say Church of Korahor, what is that? Along with that receipt, you'll get a letter from the Internal Revenue Service that says we are a church, and you donated to it. Thank you. Because godless people are doing good things. You don't have to have God to be good. I think Robert G. Ingersoll taught us that some of the best people are godless people. Jefferson even said that once. I want to thank you guys for joining us. I know that I ranted for a while, but I was so moved by this sermon, and I thought this Thanksgiving week it would be a good time for us to remember we have a lot to be grateful for, and I'm grateful for you guys. Amen. Send out a notice about Friday.